We might wonder, is this difficult client acting this way because they're maybe from a different generation or have different values or communicate differently? Maybe they've got some anxiety. When you can handle difficult conversations and not be burnt out, you can develop more clients, make better career moves. And if you're a lawyer who's thinking about the future succession planning and you're able to address these issues, you will have something much more valuable. Emotional intelligence, EQ, means you can read the room, you can build trust, stay calm under pressure, manage yourself, and adjust your style. Notice that there's nothing on this list that says never shows emotion, always has the answer, works the hardest, or wins every argument.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for another Justia webinar. My name is Nina and I'll be the moderator for today. Now, to kick things off, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Doug Brown. Doug Brown is the law firm leadership coach and chief learning officer at Summit Success LLC. As an executive coach and law practice consultant, he shares practical strategies for sustainable legal practice and attorney well-being. After experiencing panic attacks during high-stakes negotiations and receiving an ADHD diagnosis in his early 50s, Doug developed frameworks that work with your wiring, not against it. His experience includes private and in-house legal practice, serving as chief executive of the Connecticut Bar Association, and designing MBA leadership programs for experienced executives. Doug's approach is practical strategies from someone who's been there, not theory from someone who hasn't practiced law. The webinar presentation that you're about to watch will be approximately 1 hour, and Doug will be taking questions from the audience at the end, time permitting. So if you'd like to submit your questions, you can do so at any time by clicking the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen and sending them in there. Now, without further ado, here is Doug to discuss managing difficult clients and colleagues, protecting your mental health and well-being.
Thank you, Nina. It's a pleasure to be here, whether you're watching in our live performance or in a recording. I want to start with a quick question for you to consider for yourselves. When was the last time you dealt with a difficult person and you thought afterwards, man, I handled that perfectly? Yeah, right. Me neither. Here's what usually happens. The client sends you an email at 9:00 at night, usually just as you're getting ready to wind down for the day. And it should wait till the morning. You reply anyway. You miss dinner with the family and that exhaustion builds. Or maybe there's the colleague that you have to work with getting ready for a trial and you have an issue with them. You shouldn't address it directly. So you'll lie awake at 2 a.m. replaying the conversation and wake up tired, dreading that conversation with them. Here's the pattern that I've seen. As lawyers, we're smart. We have an idea of what we should do. We may even have read articles about setting boundaries or how to actively listen or how to deal with difficult people, but you're here, right? The question is, why doesn't that work in the heat of battle when it really matters? Why can't you think of the best thing to say when you're in the moment as opposed to afterwards in the clarity of moments or hours later? So in the time we have today, I'm going to show you what the CLEs, what the articles, what the videos you see online are missing. As Nina said, I'm Doug Brown. I'm a lawyer and a recovering lawyer and law firm leadership coach. And I want to help you understand what's really happening when difficult people trigger you and why knowing what to do isn't the same thing as doing it. And I'm going to show you specific things that you can do in the moment and maybe beforehand so that you finish the interaction thinking, you know what? I think I didn't handle that perfectly, but I feel good about that, or at least I didn't make it worse. So we live in an interesting and challenging ecosystem. And by say ecosystem, it's everything about our world. We have difficult clients who are under stress. We have colleagues under pressure, opposing counsel, and they're all part of the environment. And then you add your firm and your family and just the general weirdness in the world. And all that makes it difficult. And your client is going through the same thing. So we might wonder, is this difficult client acting this way because They may be from a different generation or have different values or communicate differently. Maybe they've got some anxiety that you can't see. And oh, by the way, every client you're dealing with is anxious and nervous about whatever it is they're coming to you with. And if they had any option, they wouldn't come to see you. It's true. Maybe you're like me, or they're like me, where you had no idea that you were dealing with an ADHD situation, and how that was such a superpower, but it also kicked your butt. So maybe you've got all these things going on at once. And what I found is it's difficult to untangle all this stuff in the moment when your heart rate is spiking and your logical circuits are offline. And when you can't untangle what's happening, you just keep reacting and we react and we react, and the spiral happens and it drains your energy. And so that's how burnout happens. And we as a profession aren't going to solve the burnout problem by not having those stressors. It's going to be there. In many ways, it just will continue to get worse. What we need is strategies to deal with it and to figure out what is the thing that's going on. What are the few things that are going on? Because there's never just one thing, right? It's multiple things going on. Would that it was just one thing and you could read a book or a list and like go down the menu and say, here's what I should say. So here's how we're going to approach this chaos today. We're going to talk about how to discover the issues, how to reduce the tension, increase collaboration, reclaim your time and energy. So ultimately, we're going to have to deal with difficult clients and colleagues. It's the nature of the business. But what I want to do is give you some actual strategies you can use to simplify and enjoy your practice and gain the benefits of being someone who is better than average at dealing with these difficult situations. So, not being able to deal with difficult clients and colleagues accelerates burnout. Believe me. When I was executive director of the Connecticut Bar Association, I had 10,000 lawyers as bosses. And, the joke goes, the difference between God and a lawyer. I mean, God doesn't think he's a lawyer. So, or she's a lawyer. So when you can handle difficult conversations and not be burnt out, you can develop more clients, make better career moves. And if you're a lawyer who's thinking about the future succession planning and you're able to address these issues, you will have something much more valuable to deal with. So, okay. So why is this stuff so hard? We're good problem solvers, right? We analyze complex situations for a living. This shouldn't be so difficult. Have you ever found yourself wondering that? Like, why is this so hard? Because I'm good at much more complicated stuff than this. Well, and the answer is a couple of things. One, nobody has trained us how to deal with this. We are trained in the context of a court. Where there are rules and there are judges and there's structure. Outside of that, people are messy, and we're not really trained in psychology. We're not really trained in how to deal with emotions. And if anything, what we've been trained is to deal with it with logic. And somehow with the thought that if we are just logical, that will solve everything. Well, here is the problem in the ecosystem that we have. And in the way we've been raised as lawyers is that just when we need that higher logic, the stress, the overwhelm, the burnout takes it offline. It's something that social scientists call amygdala hijacking. Now, this is the primitive part of your brain that scans for threats. It keeps us alive. It's fast, it's reactive. And when it perceives danger, physical danger, mental danger, emotional danger, it triggers your fight, flight, or freeze reflex. Now, you'd think they'd come up with better language than just all F's for that, because that's hard to say. But what happens is when you're under long-term systemic stress, that amygdala fires really, really quickly and it's really tired. So it's kind of like a hair trigger. And so when that is really firing and you're dealing with things from all sides, it literally disconnects your higher logic circuits. The very thing you need, your rational thinking, your emotional regulation, your strategic response is offline because your primitive brain is like, we have to survive first. So you probably have seen this with a difficult person in your world. Now, just take for a moment a piece of paper and just write down the first person who comes to mind when I say difficult person. Might be a client, might be a colleague, might be the partner you're working for, might be an associate that's working for you. It might be a paralegal. It might be a legal assistant, might be your brother-in-law. Who is that person? And have you ever had an interaction with them where no matter how much logic you try to use, you're just not getting through? Well, if you see that happening, it's probably because they're in some level of amygdala hijack. They don't feel safe. And I'm not talking about safe space. I'm talking about they're in survival mode. So because their brain doesn't know the difference between a tiger in the bushes and a surprise email from opposing counsel, their heart rate spikes, their logic circuit disconnects. So what we need to do is bring ourselves or those people out of that emotional state and stop the spiral so that we can then have a logical conversation. So when you've got somebody that's digging in, refusing feedback, and overreacting to minor issues, they probably know they're doing it. They might be frustrated by it. Let's recognize that that's probably not intentional behavior, but a primitive reaction. It's about their wiring. So all of our amygdalas work in the same way, but our triggers, the things that set us off, are different. Do you find yourself really patient with, say, people, but if your computer goes on starts acting up, you lose your mind? That's your trigger. So what is your trigger pattern? What are the things that you see that almost you kind of know it shouldn't set you off, but it just does anyway? Who is that person that makes you crazy? We can't bypass this step, but we can condition our response. We can develop strategies and habits so that when we feel that trigger happening, our brain can say, wait a minute, I've got a strategy for that. I don't have to be, I can move through that freeze, fight, or flee problem. Okay. It's very much like learning to be a public speaker, or when my son was a firefighter. How do they go into the burning buildings? Training. Their brains, not that they're not afraid, but they know how to deal with it. So, what are the things, understanding that's happening? It's wiring. It's not a failure of character. It's wiring and a need for training and building habits. Okay. So what are the things that are driving the conflict? And these are the things that are what I see as the 5 core drivers. Mismatch in expectations. That's a communication issue. Lack of clarity around response time. I was talking to one of my coaching clients the other day about why they're not able to, keeping them from getting to their own stuff. It's because they were in their mind believing that the other person thinks I can respond quickly. If I don't respond quickly, what's my excuse for not responding quickly? And so my wife kind of calls me Mr. Question. So my question to this lawyer was, yeah, well, what's the excuse? So that's fine that you're expecting a certain response time, but what about the matters you have on your own list? Why is somebody else's thing more important than your thing? Which gets into boundaries, the money conversation, especially with clients. I can't believe how many lawyers over the years I talked to about the money conversation, and they're struggling with collections and with getting paid on their bills. And it's because they haven't really leaned into the conversation about money and value up front. They've allowed expectations to be unclear. And then there's a lot of emotion attached because of all these things are tangled up. So oftentimes there are, and by the way, these can all be in my mental health world, these could be just in your head. It could be your own expectations about response time or money or boundaries. So, which of those drivers are things that are causing particular conflict to you? Because when we identify those triggers, we can interrupt the pattern and we can solve the burnout problem. Because remember, burnout is something that's an occupational hazard. Difficult clients and colleagues are like throwing gasoline in the fire. So we solve this problem, we solve a lot of the other problems. So what else is going on? Well, it would be great if people took everything how you intended. But the truth is, in communication, there's all these biases, these assumptions below the surface, whether it's confirmation bias that are tend to believe what supports what you already believe, or that you tend to listen to people in authority. All these biases are in play, not just for you, but for everybody in your world. And honestly, we're recording this in January of 2026. And, those biases are kind of worse than ever because we have kind of been trained through social media and algorithms that those all feed into these biases so that we kind of hear what already supports what we believe. So when we're confronted with somebody who's thinking differently and behaving differently, we tend to judge. And what I want to invite you to do is just be curious about, are one of these biases in play? Let's use our critical thinking skills that we use as lawyers to diagnose legal problems to be thinking about, is there this bias? What's really going on? And this is one of the reasons I talk about this stuff. We've got mental health on the list. We are, in the last 5 years, opened the door finally as a profession to talking about mental health. And we still have a long way to go because we believe, even those who were in it, there's this embedded assumption that we somehow, it's a failing if there's an issue, that anything if you disclose that issue, it could be a, career limiting move. But that person who you're struggling with might not be lazy. They might have something else going on. I have some depression. That controlling client might be really anxious. That scattered associate who like, why can they zoom in on certain things and they just can't get the basics done? How come they're so great talking to clients and dealing with these big, hairy problems, but they can't get their timesheets in on time? Well, that might be an ADHD thing. Now, having worked with people for the last 30 years, assigning a label to it isn't helpful. We want to focus on the behavior. We also just want to be understanding that some of that difficult person might not be voluntary. There might be some things going on. Because the problem is we can't see our own biases. These are happening below our level of awareness. So, just because the universe has a sense of humor, there's two more things that are going on that fall into this soup that we need to deal with. And I love figuring this stuff out, but when you're busy being a lawyer and trying to get everything done, and you value logic, and you just wish people would behave in a consistent way, I know it can be pretty frustrating because you're under stress a lot of the time. Part of how our brains are wired is that we have a specific work style and communication style. This is something called a DISC assessment. And I'm just going to touch this a little bit. That there are 4 factors, and they're sometimes called different things. D is dominance or drive. That's direct, fast, wants control, no patience for long explanations. And so if that's your primary pattern, and I just noticed that influence is spelled wrong there, which I have no idea how that happened. But in any case, see, just distracted, came right back. Influence, people who have that as their primary value are collaborative, enthusiastic. They want recognition, and they really hate conflict. If your steadiness is your primary trait, you want stability and process. You're not great at change. And if you're a high D who loves change, you probably need somebody on the other side of the wheel. Conscientiousness also can be called consistency. That's your accurate, logical person. Now, we typically have two primary styles and two subordinate styles. We can all be in any quadrant, but we tend to, under stress, go back to our primary thing. And the challenge is, if you're under stress and you are a high drive person that wants change and doesn't really worry about details, you're going to be more and more D. And when you are that way, the people on the opposite side of the wheel will become more and more of what they need, which pushes you away. So once we can kind of break through and understand what's going on and why it's going on, then there are strategies you can use. If you are that visionary, influence, dominant person who doesn't really compute or has trouble with all the nits and gnats and the details, there are specific strategies based on those work styles that we can employ to reduce the conflict. And when you reduce the conflict, you improve your mental health and their mental health at the same time. Oh, and by the way, you make more money, you have more clients, and you have more career options in a firm that's more valuable. So that's a very important tool. And now in my little brain, that typo of influence is going to bother me, but I'm going to let that go. we're going to move on, because another factor here, and I actually have a whole other program on managing the intergenerational workforce, but I want to just highlight this, because we've got all these things going on, right? We've got maybe some mental health issues, we've got some biases, we've got different work styles, and then we have our generations in the workplace. You might have at the top left, Barbara the boomer, right? She's a face-to-face formal communication, respects hierarchy, and wonders why the millennials or the Gen Z are as different as they are. You've got at the top right, you've got a Generation X. He might be your managing partner, efficient, direct, skeptical of authority. I'm a Gen X person. And so they're kind of stuck in the middle. Our generation's kind of stuck in the middle. You've got Mia, the millennial, on the bottom left, who is, by the way, the millennials are now up to 42. These aren't the kids. These are the core of our workforce. And most of the boomers and Gen X still struggle with a millennial problem. It's not a millennial problem. It's a people and communication challenge. We have to stop putting labels on people and just judging an entire generation based on labels. What do millennials value? Collaboration, feedback hungry, and they're purpose driven. And Gen Z, the newest generation, is very much a values driven. Here's the thing. If you're a boomer or a Gen X person, there's a little paradox that I've observed working with millennials or Gen Z. There's this paradox of, they want freedom, they want autonomy, they want to be recognized for the work they do, but they also need structure. They need boundaries that aren't micromanaging, so they can understand how you keep score. So as we are dealing with that, we're like, wow, there's a lot going on. Got generations in the workforce. You got all these things. What are we going to do about this? So what we're going to do, and I guess the thing I'm probably have already covered, is this idea about neurodiversity and just the brain science. I kind of geek out on the brain science, partially because it's my journey. I want to just be clear what neurodiversity is. Neurodiversity refers to how your brain is wired physically and how it processes information. So that might show up with labels of ADHD, anxiety, depression, autism, or other things. And there are very, very successful lawyers and business owners who have one or more of these neurodiversity challenges or opportunities. In fact, it's much more prevalent among entrepreneurs and business owners. Isn't that interesting? Neurodiversity is not a character flaw. It's not a personality quirk. It's simply a different operating system, a little bit like Mac and Windows operate differently. And it's especially common in high achievers. And you can have some of these things going on without even realizing it. So I learned all this stuff the hard way. For decades, I thought my patterns were kind of character traits. I used to joke, I think I might have ADHD, but I just can't focus on it right now. So I'd think overworking, oh, that's just me being dedicated. Perfectionism, that's high standards, that's required. Can't delegate, nobody does it as well as me. Taking on too much and turning everything into a project. Well, if I have the ability to solve a problem, I must solve the problem, or somehow I'm morally not worthy. Turns out that was the ADHD. I didn't figure it out till I was around 54, and suddenly everything made sense. And I wish I could say it was a massive relief. Kind of wasn't. There was a lot of emotion around that, including a whole bunch of time of being in denial. But what I've realized is that my differences in processing information, I needed some different strategies to block time. I've taught time management for 30 years. And I realized I'm teaching neurotypical time management strategies, not neurodiverse time management strategies. So that means ADHD is an interest-based nervous system. So it means that if it's routine, it's very hard for me to focus on. I need a strategy for that. Where if it's new and novel, I'll dive right into it. The challenge, the neurodiversity challenge, is that just accelerates the burnout cycle, because we're trying to operate in a neurotypical world where we process information differently. So once I figured this out, I started seeing this everywhere in my work as an executive coach with law firm leaders. That managing partner who's trying to plan succession, they can't let go of the client relationships or can't trust anybody else. That's not a succession problem. There's something else going on. That partner trying to bring you along, maybe they keep hiring people who don't get it, it's not a fit. That's not a hiring problem. There's a bias going on there. So if these things are ringing true to you and you're thinking, wait, this sounds like me, then I just want to tell you, you're not alone. It's very difficult, even if you're really educated on this stuff, to figure out what's really going along in these 47 variables and distill it down to something specific that you can do to begin to make some progress. You can start lots of things, but when you're trying to do it on your own, it's really hard. So let's just talk about the strategies now that I've discovered and taught that I think that I've observed can really help kind of diffuse this conflict. Because if we can have strategies to deal with that very difficult client, that very difficult partner or associate, spouse or child, then we're in much more control. We're a much better leader and life gets better. And then we don't have that kind of stress. So I'm just about to jump into the model here, the strategy, the framework that is really good and easy to use, whether you're neurotypical or not. I do want to say, as we're going along here, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I have it open next to my screen here. And I can address it when I'm right in that moment, or at least I know what questions are coming. So please feel free to put questions or comments in the Q&A. Appreciate that. Okay. It also lets me know people are out there. So, okay. I'm going to talk about the EASE model. This was developed by McLean and Company. It provides a framework for navigating difficult conversations. And I found that this works, especially when emotions is high. We have to create that sense of safety so that we can re-engage our logical brains. And I just want to address kind of a bias that I've observed that lawyers have here, is that you might say, oh boy, this is really simple. And we lawyers think simple things aren't valuable because it's a complicated problem. Therefore, it must require a complicated solution. And I have not found that to be true. Simple is sometimes really, really effective. So simple. First, we want to empathize. We want to acknowledge their emotional state. We don't want to agree with it. We just want to acknowledge that it's there. So simple phrases like, it sounds like you're under a lot of pressure right now. That one phrase can completely change the conversation. So when you're dealing with someone who's behaving in a difficult way, um, just be curious. Ask yourself what might be going on in their emotional state right at this moment. And oh, by the way, what's going on in my emotional state right in this moment? Because you have to look at both. So once you recognize that it's not this character trait like that associate who can't get their billing in on time, or that client who has unreasonable expectations and wants to call you on a Saturday and talk to you for 30 minutes and then complain that you bill them for the time. What else is going on? How do you find that out? The second part of the ease model is active listening. Listen beyond the words. Listen to what isn't being said. Get curious about the emotion underneath. What's really going on? It's the same skill you might use in a negotiation where you're trying to find out the interest behind the position. So listen without judgment. I'm going to come back to this in a minute because it's such a critical skill. The next thing in the ease model, we have to empathize, actively listening because we're curious. And then our processing, we have to simplify. We lawyers love our jargon. We think that it makes other people feel like we're competent. It doesn't. It pushes people away. In today's environment, in 2026, information is everywhere. There are AI chatbots, there's Google, there's social media. The value of lawyers now is simplifying the complicated and sharing simple things that the person can do to move from the state they're in to the state they want to be. It's about simplifying. So whenever, and oh boy, I could talk a lot about this one. Be mindful of, are you talking about it in a way that your client can really understand or that person can really understand? It's not about impressing them. It's about simplifying. And then is the last step is evaluating how did that interaction go? And do they have what they need? So that's the framework. And you can look it up and read information about it, but the articles aren't going to tell you is specifically which of these 47 things is blocking or getting in the way. So it's hard to empathize when you're triggered and you're in a pattern of behavior with a person where maybe you were with your teenager as well, that they can wake up in the morning and you say good morning and they say, what did you mean by that? And there's a pattern there that is very difficult to break. It's hard to simplify something when you need them to understand how complicated this thing is. Or maybe you're having some perfectionism and don't want to leave anything out, or maybe you need to prove your expertise. And it's hard to empower when you feel like you need to maintain control. So if you really want to use this framework, it's not, we have to figure out which of these areas do we need to be better at? Where are we already strong and where can we where could we be better? So we're leaning into stuff here that we're not comfortable with. And that is emotions. Everything we learned about emotions, I think, was wrong. Law school taught us that law is about logic. Logic and facts equals outcome. Follow the formula and you will get the right result. Emotions, ignore those. Man, they're messy, they're weak, they're undisciplined. And by the way, as a lawyer, if you express emotion, especially uncontrolled emotion, then they're going to question your judgment. You're going to feel out of control. So okay. I see a couple. Thank you for people putting in questions. I see them. I will come back to them. So we had learned and been conditioned that emotions must be suppressed. Anything you say can and will be used against you by the partner down the hall. And that was the training for all of us. There was no training in law school about how to deal with emotions or the role of emotions. And just as an example, when I was director of the Connecticut Bar Association, I had a staff, mostly young women, and they were in a meeting talking about something that was frustrating them. And I walked in because I'm a problem solver, right? I see a problem. I got to solve a problem. That's my value. And they obviously had a problem. They're great people working hard. I'm going to help. I'm going to solve the problem. That's what I was trained to do. So I started talking. And then one of them raised her hand and said, "Stop it. We don't want you to fix it. We just want you to listen." I was like, "What? Doesn't compute. What are you talking about?" Well, sometimes we just need somebody to listen. So we eventually worked out a system when I was in those situations for me to actually ask the question, do you need me to fix or listen? What I didn't understand was what's really going on is they needed to process it themselves. If I tried to fix it too quickly or if at all, that's not what they needed. They needed to fix it themselves. So I wasn't empathizing or understanding what was really going on. And yes, this is partially a Mars Venus problem, but just before we jump into our default to try to solve everything, let's be mindful that emotions are driving everything. And I will say when I'm teaching marketing and sales and how to grow a business, I'd challenge to think about this. When's the last buying decision that you made that was initiated with or that was based on logic without emotion? Every buying decision is either initiated or completed based on emotion. Otherwise, we'd all be driving the same car that was logically and objectively the best transportation. There wouldn't be brands that attracted to different emotions. We'd all do the same thing. Every decision we make is based primarily on emotion and justified with logic. So this is really talking about emotional intelligence. And I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence in just a moment. High EQ, emotional intelligence EQ, means you can read the room. You can build trust, stay calm under pressure, manage yourself, and adjust your style. Notice that there's nothing on this list that says never shows emotion, always has the answer, works the hardest, or wins every argument. EQ is the secret sauce that makes everything you do better. So let me just explain what EQ is, because I know we lawyers like formulas, and I need to share that. And there's a whole bunch. There's actually a guide. I've got some bonuses I'll talk to you about later. I don't know if I shared this in the materials about EQ guide for lawyers, but Dr. Dan Goleman is a Harvard professor and psychologist. He created this framework. He's kind of looked at as the father of emotional intelligence. And there are 4 quadrants. And it really makes sense when you think about it. Self-awareness, recognizing what's going on with yourself emotionally, physically. Self-management, controlling your own impulses. Social awareness is about understanding the emotions of others. And relationship management is using that understanding to navigate. So this supports the EASE model. The empathize is social awareness. The active listening is the social awareness and self-management. So the good news is 2 pieces. First, emotional intelligence can be learned. It's not like IQ where it's wired into you. And studies show that between IQ and EQ, emotional intelligence is more highly correlated with long-term success and profitability than IQ. It's how you're interacting with people is more important than how smart you are. So this is one of those frameworks that I work on with the clients that I'm working with. And part of it is helping them understand what's going on with them and not living with the stories in their head, and what's going on the other person and how to manage those things. It's very much, we do it in real time. So if there's one example is a partner I'm working with him on growing his team so he doesn't have to make all the decisions all by himself. And he has this other partner who everybody else thinks is toxic. And so we're having to figure out, how do we get through to that person and keep all the other relationships going. And some of that is helping him figure out what to do. And also saying, because this is how I work, is, what I've observed is you could try this, this, or that. Which one of those would be helpful for you? And he goes, tries it. We come back and we keep working through it. It's about building new habits. I mentioned a few minutes ago that active listening is critical. So I just want to cover real quickly what active listening is and what it isn't. Sorry, I got to go back one step. So active listening, actually, what I want to do is I think I've talked about this a little bit. I want to jump right to this one because this is really important, because active listening is what we should be doing, fully concentrating on what the person's saying without interrupting. What do we typically do? We are listening so that we can pull things out and formulate a response while that person's still speaking. So that way there's no dead air. As soon as they're done speaking, we have our answer figured out. If you find yourself doing that, you're not really listening. It's okay to have dead air. I used to be a PA, a public address announcer and DJ for sports events. So I hated dead air. But in this case, that silence, that clarifying question, tell me more, helps that person understand that they've been heard and gives you time to respond. Nod and maintain eye contact. Keep your phone out of the picture. Sometimes you want to take that phone when they come in and put it face down somewhere else. Signals I'm really listening to you. Asking open-ended questions, summarizing, and pausing. And sometimes your answer might be, this is what I've heard you say. Did I get that right? I said, well, I need to think about how best to approach that. That's totally fine. Sometimes that's exactly what they want you to do. So how do you know you've got a miscommunication problem? And you're missing deadlines. Your results aren't consistent. People aren't following procedures. Everybody feels stressed out. The 1,000-yard teenager stare. So those are symptoms. And what we have to figure out, and I say these are communication problems because most of the difficult client problems are in fact communication problems. It is, and you go back to those conflict drivers. We're going so fast, we are not really communicating. We think we are, but we're not. So what do you say? And this is another problem we lawyers have. When we're dealing with difficult people, we need to be conscious of two things: what we say and how we say it. And here's what we miss. How we say something matters much more than what we say. Say that again. How we say something, our vocal tone, our pace, our body language, is much more important than the actual words we use. I know, crazy, right? Depending on which study you look at, the physical words you use are less than 10% of communication, 7% by some studies. The rest, tone and body language. So It's not just figuring out what to say, it's figuring out how to say it and to read the room. And to question the kind of stories in our heads. I was talking with a client just the other day who's got some younger associates, and he's frustrated because somebody spent 10 hours reviewing a form document, and he was very frustrated, definitely triggered. How could they possibly have spent 10 hours with it? And he was going to run into their office and tell them, how could you have spent 10 hours doing this? And I said, yeah, you could do that. What if you approached it from a place of curiosity? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, hey, John, I noticed on this thing, you said it took you 10 hours. Could you walk me through, what happened there? And then listen, because you might find out something you didn't expect. Maybe your story of, I spent 5, but I wrote down 10 is true. Or maybe there's something else you can teach on. But how you say something matters critically. One of the favorite tips to diffuse conflict, and again, we diffuse conflict, we relate to people better, we break our own cycle of burnout, and we break their cycle of burnout, and we stop just talking past each other. So if you remember one thing from today, I'd like you to remember this. It's the improv principle of yes and. And yes, that's my golf ball in a sand trap. I have yes and on my golf balls. And the critical thing here is we want to stop using the word but. Because watch what it does. Somebody says to you, that was a great presentation, but I really didn't understand these 2 things. How does that land? Did you hear anything after the but? Or did that erase, that was a great presentation? Because it erases everything before it. The improv principle of yes and says that was a great presentation, and here are some things that maybe could be clearer for next time. Let's put it in your context. Mr. Client, I understand your frustration. Now, your inclination is to finish that sentence by saying, but you need to consider these things. Don't do it. Mr. Client, I understand your frustration, and there are some additional things you need to consider. See how that feels different? You're extending the conversation. So write down yes, comma, and, ... And just be mindful in your conversations today. How many times does the word but show up unconsciously? Maybe try it at home. Maybe share this strategy. This simple thing has been transformational for clients dealing with difficult people, difficult clients, because now you're saying by and means I heard you. Okay. I want to look at our time. We got about 10 minutes left, and there's a couple of things I'm going to go through quick, and I can send you some more information on these things. And one of them is when you're in conflict, we want to make sure we maintain balance in the conflict. So my friend Gary was a master of the Korean martial art of Hapkido, and he showed me when someone comes at you, your instinct is to resist and fight back. But if you pivot and stay balanced, they kind of go past you. And then who's in control? That person who's kind of off balance, or you? You gave them ground, but you didn't surrender. So the same thing is true with difficult people. Our first instinct is to resist, to defend, but we have to stay balanced. So I said, but I should have said, and we have to stay balanced. This was a magic thing when I was director of the Bar Association or the chief operating officer of the jewelry company. People would call and complain, and what they were saying could be very off base. But if I could maintain balance, draw them in, ask questions, actively listen, use yes and, then I was able to respond. because at that point they know they were heard. And sometimes the answer was, I really understand your frustration and I want to look into it, and then I'll get back to you. And that has amazing power. Now, in our rush to do everything, we tend not to do that. And the other was a military concept called the after action review. And I'm part of the bonuses I'll send you, because this took me a little bit longer than I thought it would. But to ask these 4 questions without judgment after an interaction: what did we expect to happen? What actually happened? What was different and why? And what do we do differently? Another tool that my clients say is tremendously helpful. You can do it after any conversation. It can be really informal, take seconds. It could be something that is very, very structured. But this is a self-improvement tool that's without judgment. And often this discipline is can be transformative, especially when things go well, to figure out what you need to keep doing. So you're always going to deal with difficult people who won't listen to you, no matter what you do. So the strategies that I share, remember, we want to stay calm and aware, maintain our own balance, and model the behavior that we want. And when I was in the corporate world, I learned about the idea of a root cause analysis. And the whole point was, if you're dealing with somebody who's really difficult and doesn't listen, be curious and try to ask questions about what's really going on. Like, what's frustrating about this? Why does that matter? Try to get to the real issue without turning it into a deposition. Okay. I'm going to go and hit some of these questions here. But I also want to put this up on the screen, that some of those resources I mentioned, if you go to that link or scan the QR code, you will get those additional bonuses, some of which popped into my head while we're talking here. Today. So let's take a look at the questions. So one of the questions was, quote, who diagnosed the ADHD? Doctor, psychologist, counselor? Yes. And the question, I love the question: is there a cure for it or just treating symptoms? I want to know if I have it or not, and that's why I ask. Thank you for asking. There's a fantastic resource. I'll also share this in the bonuses. It's called Attitude Mag, addtudemag.com. And that's where I started learning about it, started getting curious. And it's not that, and I love the part of the question, is there a cure? Because this is a different operating system and wiring. So we need strategies to, thank you for sharing that link, Nina. No, the answer is no, but I don't know that there needs to be a cure. We need to understand how it's presenting in us, because it's a continuum. And by the way, I'm a lawyer, not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So study some of that, see if that seems like it rings true to you. Start with your general practitioner. Have a conversation with him or her. If you're looking for resources, the Lawyers Assistance in Connecticut was called Lawyers Concern for Lawyers, 100% confidential. They have most of these organizations have amazing resources that can get you to talk to people. If you think it might be you, if you think you might have some of these issues, there's nothing, it's not a character flaw. There's nothing wrong with you. It's different. And your life will be dramatically better if you lean into it and try to figure out what's going on and give up the judgment that it's a lack of discipline or you can power through it. Because I guarantee you can't. But with the right tools and support, you can manage it so that you can leverage the really cool parts of it and moderate the things that are not. So I hope that answers the question. Absolutely lean into it. And if you've got a specific question that I didn't get to, you can leave me an email. But thank you for asking that. You're not the only one with that question. Another was a comment. Appreciate the lecture from the neurodivergent viewpoint. So relatable. Thank you. I think it's important that we talk about this, and it's still hard to talk about it. So next question was, as a supervisor, how do you work through conflict within a team of coworkers when they're looking for the supervisor to resolve an emotionally triggered conflict that is conflated and driven by unspoken competition between the coworkers? Whoa. Great question. Don't take that question away yet because I need to read it again. So you've got a team of coworkers. They want the supervisor to be the one who resolves the problem. And your coworkers are really competing, and that's the core of the problem. Fantastic question. This is kind of like a multi-level layer of Jenga here, trying to understand all right, what is the conflict? What is the unspoken competition? Who are the players? And then how do we, as a supervisor, as a leader, be the guide to help them find the resolution of the issue rather than you being the fixer? And sometimes we have to be the fixer, but the best way for long-term team performance is to understand what's going on, get to the root of the conflict, and not turn yourself into the judge where they become so codependent on you trying to resolve the conflict that it doesn't actually resolve the conflict. It just becomes institutionalized. And if you would like to discuss that via email, send me an email. I can walk you through some of that. So thank you for asking that question. How can I recognize early warning signs that a difficult relationship is impacting my mental health before it escalates? Wow. Great question. Wow, I love these questions. If you've got an inkling that that difficult relationship is impacting your mental health, then it is. There's so much microaggression and passive behavior that a relationship, so I guess the short answer to the question is recognize that there are early warning signs. And it's, if you are avoiding that person, if you're finding yourself really short with that person, if you're trying to minimize any kind of time with them, if anytime they are sending you any information that you just get triggered and defensive, that's a sign that something's going on. And that's the time to get curious about what's really going on myself and what might be going on with that person. And then to get some sort of outside perspective to help you kind of unpack that. Taking care of your own mental health is not selfish. I used to believe that, by the way. I used to believe that I have to take care of everybody else, that if I take care of myself, obviously being selfish, I'm going to push all my own stuff down and worry about taking care of everybody else. What I learned is that's actually avoidance, it's masking, and it's self-medicating. It's just self-medicating with adrenaline. When you lean into taking care of yourself, you actually improve your capacity to help and work with other people. So it's not selfish, that's selfless. It's helping you improve yourself. So the bonus resources, I'm going to go back and listen to this presentation, this recording, and make sure everything I shared, I will share an email. But I'm going to send you an after action review guide, a checklist for active listening, my little ebook on lawyers for emotional intelligence, and a few other things that people find useful. I see another question. I'm going to come back to that one. I'm going to send those to you a little bit over time. Remember that information by itself doesn't solve the problems. It's information. So I want you to consider and ask yourself, is what I need more information? Or maybe you get the more information and then you say, you know what? I'm not sure I can figure this out by myself, because that's what I learned. I learned that, I say there's no special sticker for trying to figure this out yourself. Just because you're smart and you're a lawyer doesn't mean you can all by yourself figure this out. That's why there are professions That's why people like me will have my own people I talk to. I'm my coach and my therapist and other things. Because not that I can't figure it out, but why wouldn't I go get help to help me be better um, than continuing to struggle unnecessarily? And that's a big problem for lawyers. We don't want to go ask for help. We somehow think that asking for help is a weakness. Well, what if asking for help wasn't a weakness? What if it was a strength? So the question here is, why do certain clients or colleagues trigger such strong stress responses compared to others? It's all of those things that I talked about earlier. There are biases. There are all these things that are going on, and there's all kinds of baggage and stuff going on in our own heads trying to prove ourselves. It's a complicated thing, and I don't mean to just say it's complicated or it depends. It's just more than I have time to go into um, here. I see other questions. You know what I'm going to do is go ahead and go to the subscribe to the bonuses and the link. I'm going to capture these questions, and Nina, if you can get these to me afterwards, I'm going to use these and answer them in the emails that I'll send out over the next week or so. Love these, and I'm just not going to have time to answer all of these here. So I do want to just invite you to say, answer who's on your team. And I said this before, don't try to do this all by yourself. Here's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. When you get just a little bit better at dealing with the most difficult clients and colleagues and situations, it has a huge positive effect on reducing burnout and improving client relationships. The investment in this pays off multiple times, especially for you and your mental health, so that you are not triggered, so that you know how to deal with things like people who are hopelessly toxic, or people who have superiority complex, or just seeing things out in your world that you think are wrong and you should be able to control, but you can't, and it gets you pulled into different conflicts. Or in a world where different, dare I say, political views are weaponized and are used against you, when there was a time when we could have a conversation. So investing in fixing this is hugely beneficial. You can't do it by yourself. I want to appreciate all the time you spent with me today. I write about these kind of things every week on my Substack, Beyond the Practice Grind, about leadership succession planning. And you have my email. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for what you do. Keep working on this stuff that they didn't teach us in law school. It matters. And when you get better at it, life gets dramatically better. Nina, back to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for that excellent presentation and for answering all of our audience questions. We want to thank you all so much for joining us for another Justia webinar. And thank you, Doug, again for the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a lawyer attending today, don't miss out on our Justia Lawyer Directory, a free tool to boost your professional presence. You can claim your profile at lawyers.justia.com to connect with millions of potential clients each month. And you can also explore our newly redesigned listing pages, including our new FAQ edition, to allow you to expand your reach in search and AI results. And if you want even more visibility, we do have our premium placements, both gold and platinum, to put you ahead of the competition. And you can learn more about those at marketing.justia.com. Thank you all so much again, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.